Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day I try to demystify tech trends and understand how those trends can help businesses overcome real-world challenges. And today, I want to take a look at how privacy concerns and process issues are still holding businesses back from developing things like advanced analytics initiatives. But I also want to explore how synthetic data that is artificially generated by an AI algorithm might be able to help. And Accenture is a household name that have a big reputation for helping businesses overcome a wide range of challenges. So today I invited Fernando Lucini onto the podcast from Accenture to learn more about exactly what synthetic data is and the challenges that it can help businesses overcome. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Cambridge here in the UK, where Fernando is waiting to speak with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Fernando. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Fernando Lucini. I'm the Chief Data Scientist at Accenture. So my day role or my day job, if you want to put it that way, is to take care of the data scientists and machine learning engineers at Accenture globally. And I live in Cambridge in the UK, so I also take care of the ones here in the UK.
Excellent. And if I was to take you back before the days of machine learning and back to your upbringing, can you share your origin story? Can you remember where your passion for technology came from, what lit that spark in you and ultimately put you on this path today? Maybe it was when you were being brought up, or maybe it was a little bit later in life, but can you share that story?
So the way I was thinking about this over the weekend, and it's interesting. My dad worked for IBM for 40 years. So this is obviously at a time when in the 70s and the 80s and so on, when technology was very basic. But I was one of those children that would forever be putting my finger inside these new machines, right? And I'm sure all your listeners will have done it at some point. You know, you see the VHS or the Betamax, and you stick your finger in the little slot, right? So I was one of those people predisposed to an engineering mind, right? For me, it's how does that work? How does that work? So I've always been very curious about that, and I did study electronic engineering at university and so on. But I was always fascinated by how things work, and moving into software. I spent 18 years as chief architect and chief technology officer in the software industry. For me, it was always about that creation journey, and I was fascinated from the beginning on how can we use machines to solve more and more complex problems. So all that leads me to today. But I think the core for me is that that engineering curiosity. How does that work? And then how do I make it better?
I think that is the secret to it. I speak to so many techies, and it all seems to be armed with that curious mind from a young age. And so it's great to hear about how that took shape for you. But I invited you on the podcast today to talk about why privacy concerns and process issues are still holding businesses back from developing advanced analytics initiatives, and how synthetic data, artificially generated by an AI algorithm, might actually be able to help. But before we dive in, can you just set the scene and expand on some of the issues that you're seeing with businesses right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a wonderful philosopher called Harari, Israeli philosopher, who I think postulates that data ownership is like the question of our time, right?
Yeah.
For our generation, the ownership of data is a massive question. And if you translate that to you and me and everybody else, we're generating all this amazing data, and then companies get a hold of it, and hopefully they want to give us a great service, or governments get a hold of it, and a citizen want to do things for us and so on. But this data is obviously very precious, right? It's just a lot about who you are, who I am. There's things in there that I don't want to share, like my medical records, or, I might even choose not to share my shopping experiences. It's entirely down to me what I want to share or not. But all this is incredibly important because it's generated an entire industry around it, right? The Facebooks, the Googles, all these wonderful companies that give us services are really based on what we are doing as individuals. So protecting that and how to use it is a massive question. So now imagine that you're any company that wants to, a bank or a car company, right? Anybody that wants to use this data to do something interesting for you and for me, well, we have to be very, very cautious these days as to not only from a regulatory perspective, where the regulators are telling us, hold on, you need to be excruciatingly careful about this information in the context of banking or in the context of health. But even as a manufacturer of a car, I need to be cautious about how I use this data, because all of us as consumers are quite sensitized to, again, this massive question of the ownership of data and how it's used and whether I agree or disagree. So that makes companies a little bit cautious about how to use this, which, as you said in your introductory question, can slow things down. And we can talk about synthetic in a second and how that may support some of the freedom in this. It doesn't change from the fact that, again, ownership of information is probably the question of our time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think it feels like businesses have all been on this journey over the last 5 to 10 years, and data was once seen as the biggest asset within an organisation. And in some circles, it's almost being seen as the biggest liability too. Is that fair, something that you see?
Oh, absolutely. And it depends where you're coming at it from, right? It's on one hand, I always say that we as a society have become the absolute best at storing information, right? We're great at storing it. We're not so great at exploiting it, right? We're getting better, but we're amazing at storing it. So we're, under our belts, we have these treasure troves of information, which, as you say, in some cases are, hey, I'm holding this, and is there some liability in holding it? Because I'm responsible for it, and if for some reason it gets exposed, then okay, that's a problem. On the other hand, in the same conversation, even, right, or even in the same meeting, you have this information has a lot of information that we could use, a lot of insight we could use to help this consumer or this citizen in whatever endeavor and whatever practice they're going to go for. So absolutely, you get this. On one hand, how do I keep this safe from, not just from wrongdoing, from any form of exposure or any form of liability, and at the same time, how do I use it safely? And in the middle of that, there's this uncomfortable moment where you think, even if I'm keeping it really safe, even if I think I'm using it in a way that's really sensible, as the consumers use it, will they agree? And you get this moment of pause where you think, ethically, morally, am I doing the right thing for these people? And that's a really tough line for companies to ride, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was just thinking about, if we look at something like financial services in particular, restrictions around data usage and customer privacy are again particularly limiting. And in my very basic understanding, I believe that synthetic data's most obvious benefit is that it eliminates the risk of exposing critical data and compromising the privacy and security of companies and customers. But is that something you can expand on?
Yeah, absolutely, and we should talk for 2 seconds about the evolution of this, right?
Yeah.
So we've created data synthetically for a while, right? It's not a new thing. It was in some cases used for testing. You'd create this fake. Well, let's call it just fake data. I don't like to call it fake data because it feels there's something untowards there. It's just data sake. It's synthetically created. It's the initials were really simple, super simple. Just randomized data, give me some random dates, put them in there, as long as they're sensible. People who get services from a bank were not born in the 1800s, so let's make it from what's sensible to what's sensible, right? And then just make up numbers. And we evolved to that because obviously that was only useful for testing. It wasn't really useful for doing anything interesting. And we evolved towards, okay, well, now we need data. For example, if you and I were doing on the street and somebody came with a little questionnaire and said, we would like to know your preference of chocolate bars or whatever, and I'm using that as a simple example, but it could be anything, right? Yeah. The government asking you for information, and you'd fill those things in, and there was the need for us to be able to take that information and use it in a way that doesn't expose Fernando's view or Neil's view on a particular issue, but the same information can be used to give the government or the vendor or whoever it was that was asking the question some fair information. So we used a bunch of techniques to make that private and make sure that statistically you couldn't pick out Fernando specifically from that. But if Fernando was taken out of that, the rest of the information would still be valid. Right? So we have these statistical techniques to try and fill this stuff in. As we move a little bit forward, we find ourselves in the world of artificial intelligence created synthetic data. Now, why is that interesting and different? It's interesting because with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, we can just take a really large data set and we can extract out of that, let's call it the patterns, the signals, The probability distribution is the formal way of thinking. Take out the effectively the pattern, and then the AI can take that pattern and effectively sample out values from that pattern. So if you think about it as a kind of like a 3-step, take the pattern out of information. Now you have a pattern, but the pattern itself has none of the information of the original information, if you think about it that way, right? It's like a way to simplify it in your mind's eye is it's a little bit like taking data and creating a formula that if you put values in it would recreate the data, but the formula hasn't got the numbers, hasn't got the dates, hasn't got your name, hasn't got anything. So it's really not possible out of that formula for you to recreate the original information with all its privacy concerns. But you can use that formula to put in numbers and sample out, and I'm super simplifying that, but to sample out and get a bunch of new numbers and new names and new whatevers that in no way, shape, or form connect to the original data, but you can use with exactly the same signals. So as you can see in that 3-step process, you suddenly have this bunch of data that you can use that has all those signals and all that wonderful stuff in it that you can model to find signals for purchasing, or if in the context of COVID, I think it would have been super useful to be able to take all our COVID information, send it to between the Americans, ourselves, the Europeans, everybody else, put it together and actually do amazing research without ever disclosing you or me or anybody else's information. It would have been an amazing thing. So that's in context how AI synthetic data comes into the picture over a period of time.
And just to bring to life everything that you've just mentioned there and give people listening an almost before and after picture around the benefits of synthetic data, can you just walk me through how a company could potentially quickly train machine learning models on large data sets and accelerate the process of training and testing and deploying an AI solution? Because I think that is the kind of stuff that often intimidates business leaders, isn't it?
Yeah, you're quite right. And synthetic data is still a little bit intimidating. I love your use of that word. Still a little bit intimidating. The reason is this: if the mechanisms and techniques to create the synthetic data, there's things like called variational autoencoders and all sorts of generative networks and things like that, are all on the difficult side and on the advanced side of machine learning today. So they're quite complicated things to make. And if we can break it down, you're trying to create this set of artificially created data, but you need to make absolutely sure that it reflects the original signal. So I've really simplified it in my previous explanation. You take this, it creates a signal, then you take that signal and you sample it out. But that is actually a simplification of a very complex process to get it right. And not only that, to be able to assure ourselves that we got it right, and to be in a position where we can say, what are the measures? What are the things that we can measure to assure ourselves that this is right? Without always going back to the original data and saying, well, hold on, I'm back to the original to test if the new one is kind of in the ballpark, right? So that's where we are in the early days, and that's why it's still a little bit intimidating. Once companies and smart people out there and engineers start creating the mechanisms to make this a little bit less intimidating, you're in a place where the only thing you've got to do is have a data set, apply these techniques, get the signal, apply the sampling, get the synthetic set, use the governance that you've put around this technique to validate that synthetic set actually is what you think it is, what you want it to be, with no manipulation. No, it's all exactly as it is. It is effectively a synthetic version of the original with all its glory, with all its bumps, with all its features. And so the process should be a simple one, but the truth is, it at the moment it's on the difficult side of difficult, and there's a few startups that are doing great things in here, but there's not that simple machinery that you can just say, I take this, I press the button, and I'll give you an example. We're working with the Turing Institute, which we have a partnership with, where we're working together with them to figure out exactly some of these measures that I've described. So what are the things that we can generalize as measures that can give us confidence that this thing we've created is effectively a synthetic copy without any of the privacy concerns of the original, with all of the assurances that we need.
And again, just to give any business leader listening some tangible takeaways here, what are the biggest challenges for businesses right now that you're hearing about from all those conversations that you're having? And How does synthetic data help them overcome those challenges? Because I think everyone's starting to think about what they're going to be doing in 2022, what problems they're going to be solving. I think this would really help.
Yeah, and we can tie up a couple of the points we've spoken about, right? So simple things like I've got some amazing customer data that I'm protecting with everything I've got, right? As we said at the beginning, I'm protecting it because it's my duty to protect it. But in being so protected, I can barely use it. It would allow companies to take this information about their customers or about citizens even, and use it in a much freer way, because you no longer have the concern of you have the concern of privacy, but you have it controlled and you have it documented and you have it in a way that it's much easier to use. I'll give you a palpable example that we've lived through. We've got a customer who protects data so strongly for their customers, as well they should do, that the only way to do analytics on that data is in production environments, because production environments, these are the environments that we use to actually put things against the customers, the kind of things you see when you touch your computer and you touch your banking app. That goes to a production environment, which is the safest, strongest, all these kind of things, which obviously is very difficult, because some of the things we want to do is experiment, analyze, play around with the data, find interesting things and ways to help people. So they're not really designed to play around, but they are the safest. So with synthetic data, what we can do is create the synthetic version of this information, put it in an environment that's still secure, but a lot lower security in the sense of hardening. It's still super protected. It's still not going to get out there, but it's in a place where it's much easier for them to actually use all day long. And that's in the context of a very sort of banking type of environment. In a less regulated space, the same applies. We got customers who are taking this information and saying, fantastic, I'm protecting it here. It has all the GDPR controls, all the European controls on personal information. I'm making a copy and putting it in a laboratory where people can actually play with it and use it in a safer way. But the thing that's I think the evolution of this is that rather than taking them 6 to 8 months to move data around, make it secure, get the lawyers involved, get compliance involved, you're able to do this pretty quickly, super quickly. And that's a super important evolution of this problem, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. And I also think while the benefits of synthetic data are compelling and realizing them can be difficult, generating synthetic data is a highly complex process, as we've discussed. And do it right, though, and an organization needs to do more than just plug in an AI tool and analyze its data set. So I appreciate this is a big question, and this is only a 30-minute podcast, but where should they start, and how can they avoid making unnecessary mistakes that you might have seen previously from the outset?
You're quite right. We've simplified what is a very complex process, and obviously synthetic data is not the be all and end all. It's a piece of the puzzle, right, of what we do all day in analytics. So, but if you're going to engage in it, the first problem you're going to have is the confidence of the people around you to understand what it is. I mean, you and I are talking about this in this podcast, and I suspect people will still scratch their head on what is this synthetic thing anyway. The truth is, in the context of a business, that's difficult. So step number one, educate people as to what is the synthetic thing, why is it safe, how is it going to help. So start with the education part, creating the synthetic data set as a first exercise, almost like get a lab and create a data set, is almost like cart before the horse, because people that you work around in compliance and legal and everybody in a normal company or in a government might not really understand why it's safe, how it's safe. They might need a lot of reassurances that say, but is this, I'll give you an example. If this information had some understood bias in it, because it was geographic data which about people, so obviously we have people in different areas of the country which have different setups and different biases. Does this data also have those biases? And the answer is yes, because it's a copy of the original, so the biases are still there. It hasn't solved that, but you need to make sure people understand aspects like this and many others, which are, at least from my perspective, in the highly complex aspects of education of AI in a company, where on average companies are not that greatly educated on AI as a whole, right? So to answer your question very specifically, first step, educate folks as to what this synthetic thing is, how it's going to work, why is it useful, and how you're going to use it in a safe way. And with this education, you're in a place where if you do create it, you might be able to use it. Otherwise, you're going to end up creating something that you're going to have to endlessly explain. And it's just not going to work.
So, looking towards the future then, are there any particular trends that excite you, and how do you see them reshaping the landscape again? Because we are at that time of year where everyone's looking at trying to predict what trends are dominating now, what they're going to change next year. So is there anything that stands out to you?
For me, and maybe you've seen the same, but I've been working specifically in my field is text, the understanding of text, personal field. And I've been working in it for 20-something years. And in the last 2 or 3 years, it's probably moved more than in the last 20.
Yeah.
There's a new field newish field of machine learning called transformers. And it's really upsetting the entire landscape of these architectures, how they apply to text. And now they're moving on to video and speech and other things. So for me, I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see a resurgence of use cases in the field of text and the understanding of text, because this new science, which is say a substantial change, has the potential to unlock a lot of that, because we kind of hit a wall with text analytics. We've come to the point where we squeezed as much as we could out of the previous generation of science and engineering, and suddenly got these new things that unlock a lot of value. Now they have downsides, which is they need a lot of data, but they have upsides, which is that they are all transferred learning and they can get you there quicker. So I think my prediction is in the next 2 years, we're going to see yet another sort of push in the field of understanding of text, understanding of voice, which is going to be super interesting. And I look forward to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's something I'm seeing a lot of as well. What about yourself? What are you going to be focusing on in 2022? I appreciate it's probably not too much you can share about what you're doing at Accenture, but is there anything you can?
No, I'm happy to share, because we are lucky as Accenture. We always see solving customers' problems, and in doing so, we get exposed to all the wonder of thousands of use cases and the application of all sorts of technology. For me, the exciting thing about this coming year is what I call the professionalization of AI. So this is where, if you think about ML engineers and data scientists and all these people working in companies, it's not really an established profession. And it's certainly a profession, by the way. You don't wake up in the morning, do a 3-day course at some institution, and you're a data scientist in the same way that you wouldn't do that to be an architect, right? So it's going to be the year of looking at a company and saying, all right, well, is everybody understanding of their role in this? Because AI is here to stay. Data science and machine learning is here to stay. It's ever more part of the company's life. In some cases, it's the entire company's life for some of these modern companies, right? It's all based on data and AI. So what is the role for everybody in this? And what does it mean to be a professional data scientist in a food manufacturer, in a supply chain company, in a bank? I think we're going to start seeing, for me, I know it's less to do with the science, but it's exciting to see and to watch and to help customers in the journey of professionalizing. I'm really excited about that.
Love that. And we've kind of come full circle now. We began the podcast talking about your origin story and the journey that you've been on, but now it's time to have a bit of fun and end the podcast by asking, what has been the soundtrack to your career in tech? Is there a particular song or piece of music that has inspired you along the way? And if you've got a song and story for us, we'll add that song to our Spotify playlist.
Oh, that's so I'm a big guitar player. I've been playing guitar since I was 8 years old, so I'm a big music guy. And would I choose one once? Yes, I'll tell you what. David Palmer has a wonderful song called, as I'm walking to you now, I shouldn't forget the names of these things, but Johnny and Mary, which is the most wonderful piece of music. And I find myself many times, and many techies do this, putting that on and droning to it while I'm actually working for hours on repeat. And it just gives me a measure of peace and calm as I'm writing papers or whatever. So for me, I think that would be my soundtrack to my career.
That's a great tune too. I'd almost forgot about that. Somebody did a cover of it last year, which was pretty cool as well. I can't remember who did it, but I'll add that to our Spotify playlist. And finally, I appreciate Accenture is a pretty big website. It covers so much on there. But if anyone listening wants to find out more information about anything that we've discussed today, what's the best starting point?
If I was them, I would go into, we do have an AI site at Accenture. I would go to or even just search for scale AI and Accenture, and you'll see a nice set of information we have around our particular point of view around how to get value out of AI in this day and age. And I think that'll be a fantastic place for them to start.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today about how, privacy concerns and process issues are still holding businesses back from developing advanced analytics initiatives. And it's great to hear how synthetic data, which is artificially generated by an AI algorithm, might be able to help in some of those big challenges that we're seeing right across multiple industries right now. But more than anything, thank you for sharing your story and leaving us with a great song too. So thanks for sitting down with me today, Fernando.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So, with synthetic data, a company can quickly train machine learning models on large data sets, and in doing so, accelerate the process of training, testing, and deployment in an AI solution. And this addresses real challenges for so many companies, such as the lack of enough data to train a model, because access to a large set of synthetic data actually gives machine learning engineers and data scientists much more confidence in the results that they're getting at different stages of that model development. But, and there is always a but, organisations need to do more than just plug in an AI tool to analyse its data sets. These tasks require people with specialised skills, not Liam Neeson. So whenever I hear the word specialist skills, I always go off on one there. But they require people with specialised skills and truly advanced knowledge of AI. But the benefits, that is where things get exciting. So over to you. I've certainly learned a lot about the use of synthetic data today, and I hope you did too. But if you've got any additional comments, questions, insights, your area of expertise, if you want to come on the podcast, if you've got any questions, please email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. And if you'd like to work with me, if you're thinking of launching a podcast, you need help with that, or if you need help with your business blog writing or ghostwriting your CEO's thought leadership posts, pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, and send me a message there too. But that's it for today, so a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.